Greetings everybody around the world, wherever you may be. You're very welcome to another edition of Capricorn Radio. This is your host, James Swagger, and for the next couple of hours we're going to be talking to Brooks Agnew. Before we do, just don't forget you can check out the archives on the new YouTube channel, Capricorn Radio. You'll find that at capricornradio.com, you'll find the links there. And don't forget we're doing 2 live shows a week, Tuesdays and Fridays, and I also do the other Saturday show for Philosophy Think Tank, and it's getting quite a few hits, so don't forget to subscribe, folks, and check it all out. So let me tell you a little bit about today's guest. I'm not going to go too mad on his bio, because the guy's going to tell him himself. He's Brooks Agnew, who's been raised in Pasadena, California. Dr. Brooks Agnew spent most of his youth hanging around Caltech and the folks who co-opted at Jet Propulsion Labs. He entered the Air Force in 1973, where he became electronics engineer. After earning an honorable discharge, he attended Brigham Young, Western Kentucky, and Tennessee Technological Universities. He has a bachelor's degree in chemistry, a master's degree in statistics, and a PhD in physics. He's featured scientist in the 1997 Wendy Robbins documentary on HARP, Holes in Heaven. He is currently the president and CEO of Vision Motorcars Incorporated, designing and manufacturing affordable electric vehicles for highway use. What a bio that is. So without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Hi, Brooks. Welcome to Capricorn Radio.
Oh, thank you very much. Good to be here.
Wow, what a bio you have. What a super interesting guest I have today, Brooks. I feel privileged.
Necessity is the mother of strange bedfellows. What can you say?
For sure. You've had quite a strange career, Brooks. I mean, I know you're an author as well. We're going to get into some of your books later, but you're not afraid to put yourself on the line and have a look at some things, Brooks. And that's unusual as a physicist. I mean, I know, because I have a degree in physics, and it's mostly academic. I mean, I'm an engineer by trade, to be honest with you. But, I find physics is a bit, it's a bit watertight. You're not allowed to think outside the box. Only so much, but you strike me as a guy that wants to be outside the box. You want to be on the cutting edge of things, Brooks. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, well, that's the fun part. In physics, you have to kind of draw an ideological line in the sand. It's either you're going to only collect data that agrees with your hypothesis, or you're going to collect it all, even if it takes you in another direction. And I just resolved to do the latter. I just said I'm not going to throw out data, no matter how weird it is. And, you have to classify it correctly. Sometimes it's just personal observation or opinion. But sometimes it's very, powerful information that leads you in another direction with another conclusion beside the one that you, wanted to find with your original hypothesis.
I remember that HARP documentary, Holes in Heaven. That was awesome. I remember seeing that when it came out, Brooks. And, I guess you go into Tesla technology quite a lot. I mean, that's quite cutting edge stuff too, like.
Well, it's hard not to. There's another soul that,
Wow.
Just kind of went where the evidence led him, and he wasn't afraid to plug into energies that, people had, not used before. We still, to this day, really don't understand what electricity is. I mean, we know how to use it. We know how to predict it and calculate it and measure it and quantify it and pay for it, of course. But we don't really know what it is. And I think that when Tesla began coaxing electricity from whatever dimension it comes from into ours and using it to really do great things, big things, it scared people.
Yeah.
1 or 2 great inventions, and he was a genius. After 1 or 2, he became a crackpot, and they really had to get him out of their society because he was going somewhere where the capitalists didn't want to go.
Yeah, what a pioneer he was, Brooks. What a pioneer this man was. And like you say, genius. I think, I put him on a par with Einstein. Einstein was a genius of the physics, and he was a genius of the experimental end of things,
Well, Einstein had his limitations, and he admits them himself. He was not a great mathematician. He needed a lot of help learning mathematics after he became a physicist to explain the things that his genius mind was leading him to. For instance, he was a great theoretical physicist. He could put himself in an elevator or on a spaceship or riding on a photon somewhere. And with that perspective, really taught us how to understand and how to explore the universe. Mm-hmm. But the math to get from, to quantify time and force and mass, that he had to practice with, that he had to build on. And one of Einstein's greatest features, one of his greatest personality traits was that he was very good in the public eye. He was kind of physics frontman for a lot of great minds, Fermi and other physicists that were more brilliant in some respects than Einstein, Max Planck and Niels Bohr. They were all great minds, but they didn't like the public eye. And so they let Einstein sort of be that public eye, and he became a very good interface for the general public with the complex ideas behind physics.
What strikes me too, Brooks, is that Tesla and Einstein were of the same era, and there wasn't much interaction, if anything. They were aware of each other, I think. But
yeah, not at all. In fact, they were in different fields completely. Einstein was really a contemporary with Mark Twain. Mark Twain was one of his very close friends. As you know, Samuel Clemens was a great, satirist and a writer, and Nikola loved to show his newest inventions and ideas to Sam Clemens, to Mark Twain, and often used him as a kind of, human prop in some of his World's Fair demonstrations, much to Mark Twain's consternation. One time he demonstrated a subsonic beam on him at a World's Fair, and it caused Mark Twain to lose control of his bowels.
Wow.
So it was just one of those weird relationships. They were both creative souls, and they really enjoyed each other's presence.
I find it quite sad sometimes. I'm quite a humanitarian too, Brooks, and I look back in history, and I like to research the scientists, I like to know the mind behind the science and the personal life story that they had, and I feel so sad about Tesla, who he died alone in a hotel room, knowing that he, gave the world its modern perspective, all the electricity, all the lights, all the inventions. He knew it. He knew he wouldn't be remembered.
It's absolutely true. Absolutely true. It is sad, and it is, he was an outcast. He was banned. He was sent to Colorado Springs, with the express understanding that we'll continue to feed you a little bit of money so that you can play out there, but you stay out of our playground, out of our sandbox. And so Westinghouse and Edison and J.P. Morgan made, unbelievable amounts of money off of connecting humanity to the grid that Tesla had created.
He was up against it with these titans, wasn't he, Brooks?
We all are. And it's a sad thing to see. And that's one of the things I do with my radio program is I go into some of the programs that are leading edge, either in genetics or in energy or in, so we call it instrumentation. And if you trace back through the grants from the universities that develop some of these ideas, it all leads to one place. It leads to a military complex. Even the movies that we see coming out of Hollywood that have to do with science fiction, the funding for those movies is so critical for these films to be able to make it to the screen, for people to be able to see them and enjoy them in a theater. And depending on what kind of special effects they have or what kind of theme they have, it takes a lot of money to make some of these movies, hundreds of millions of dollars sometimes. A lot of that money comes from the same sources. So you have to wonder, what kind of, propaganda are we being fed? If you are a creative scientist, or you have a incubator shop, or you're, bringing some great inventor, whether he's a teenager or a seasoned engineer, under your wing in your factory, and you need grant money to be able to experiment on things that probably won't return on an investment unless you make a really great breakthrough. Mm-hmm. That has to usually come from risk funds that are typically come from grant funds. And unfortunately, 90 to maybe close to 100% of those grants come from military sources.
Yeah, the military is 20, 30 years ahead of the actual, public domain, and I think it will always be like that, Brooks. I can't see it changing anytime soon.
People I know in that genre, what motivates them, what drives them to do this is they tell me, we have to do this. And I say, why do you have to do this? Why do you have to keep inventing something to put under that red button on your desk? And they say, because if we don't do it, our enemies will, and we'll be caught off guard. And I said, that's all well and good. I understand the philosophy behind that. But then why, when you hook it up to the red button on your desk, are you compelled to push it?
Just on the military then, and I want to talk about HARP, Holes in Heaven documentary. HARP is this facility in Alaska. Most people would probably be aware of this nowadays. I think it's now fashionable to talk about Tesla. I mean, I remember growing up and doing my electrical engineering exams and electronics as well, and it was obviously you would learn about Tesla doing that. The unit of magnetism is Tesla, but back then nobody ever knew of Tesla. Now it's fashionable to talk about Tesla. But there's been a lot of documentaries, and I think he knew himself that he wouldn't be remembered for his accomplishments until many years had passed. He even said on his deathbed. It's strange he even envisaged that as well. But for those not familiar with HARP technology, can you tell us a little bit about HARP, and then tell us about your contribution to the Holes in Heaven documentary?
It's an interesting story. I started in 1983. I was hired by an oil company to take a technology that they had been exposed to but wasn't perfected, called ground probing radar, and to develop it as a field suitable instrument for exploring for oil in some of the world's most inhospitable areas. It had some promise. There was some Tesla technology where radio waves, clean radio waves, long wave, could be beamed into the ground. They would, of course, reflect off of all of the substrata in the ground, bouncing all over the place, and they could be picked up, those reflections, a ways off, and then they could be spectrographically analyzed because they had now been twisted all up by reflecting off various strata in the ground, and those wave patterns seemed to, at least the original inventor of it, Nikola Tesla, seemed to think that there was some indication of what the structure of the substrata might be based on those wave shapes. Well, of course, it takes a painstaking data collection. And one of the things that I had access to that Tesla did not have access to is all of the geological data from the drilling. I had the geological records from all of the wells that were drilled within, 100 miles of me as I was doing this research. So as I would go out and I would take the readings, and I developed the antenna system and the way of controlling the antennas remotely so that I could get literally quarter-degree increments, and I could get the readings and collect the wave shapes and start to do the statistics. And what I determined from that is that there were characteristic wave shapes for oil and gas and water and coal and shale and water, fresh and salt. And it became very useful information to the oil and gas industry. There were some shortcomings to it, which I overcame with other methods, collecting precision gas samples, headspace samples, and also reading and spectrifying the radiation species that were coming up through the ground. I was able to, give good analysis of what was under the ground. So I did that for 3 years, every single day, 8 hours a day, and I was about bored out of my mind, but I was making really good progress with it. And when we finished with it in the 4th year, we drilled 55 oil wells in 9 states, and we never missed. And we examined about 350 wells in that 1.5 year period. So a lot of those sites were dry, which we correctly predicted that they were dry, and the ones that ended up having oil, we were 100% correct. So the system did work. It was very repeatable. I published a paper on it, and the writers or the developers of the HARP video read that paper, and they contacted me in 1997, some years later, and said, we would like you to contribute. So I said, sure. I looked at their data, their information, and I met Dr. Bernard Eastland, who was the one that originally penned the 7 patents that became the basis for HARP. And to tell you the truth, it scared the hell out of me. The power I was working with was up to about 50 watts. Wow. That's about all the power you can handle remotely with batteries out in the wilderness. And we were successful with it. We could take readings with it. We had some strange events happen. One time we were up in Oregon and we turned the unit on, and 5 seconds after we turned it on, there was what felt like about a 4.5 quake occurred underneath us. And although, it could have been marked out as a coincidence, we really didn't think that we had caused that quake. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, when you're taking records, as I said, you don't throw out any data. Oh, by the way, when we turned it on, we had an earthquake. You put that in your lab notebook, and you never think anything is going to come of it. And then I see this billion-watt system in the same frequency range that I was working with ground-probing radar, with the original Tesla technology. Only they're putting so much power behind it, and they're focusing it and reflecting it off the ionosphere. I said to myself, this thing could really trigger a quake. If there's a quake ready to happen, this thing could make it happen on command, and it could steer weather around. So those were the 2 areas that I could offer some expertise in. Dr. Nick Begich offered the expertise on the mind control aspects of the weapon system.
Yeah, Tesla was a little bit worried about his own inventions too, wasn't he? He was very protective of, his knowledge, because he knew that it was powerful. The stuff that he was inventing or philosophizing and built this stuff in his head. I mean, he was worried what use it was going to be used for.
Well, at first he wasn't. And I would say for half of his scientific career, he was not worried at all. He was prolific. And I would say that there were several people who wore out good sets of shoes running his ideas to the patent office so they could claim credit for it. I would say Tesla did not do a good job of protecting his ideas in the beginning, but later in life, after he saw what the capitalists were doing, or I should say major corporations now, what they were doing with his technologies, then he became much more protective, and he went to his grave with many of his ideas so buried in code that no one was able to, shall I say, decipher them and share them with the general public. Yeah. But in the beginning, no, he didn't protect anything. He did come up with AC, alternating current, which was a much better way of propagating electricity over wires without line losses. Mm-hmm. However, he realized very shortly thereafter that the AC frequencies were not healthy for biological systems, and it was the DC that was much more conducive to, being around people all the time. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, Westinghouse and JP Morgan had already taken off with the idea of metering electricity to people, and they wanted him to shut up. And so that's when they banished him to Colorado Springs.
Sure. Yeah, they controlled him really. There was a lot of control on Tesla. I mean, a lot of people don't concentrate on that, Brooks. I mean, I sometimes wonder was he naive in his early days, or?
No, he was just not a good businessman.
Yeah.
He could come up with the ideas, but he couldn't monetize them. He couldn't turn them into a house or, a lifetime of income to impress his girlfriend that he was in love with. He just couldn't turn it into money. And I run into the same thing today when we meet inventors who have ideas, and we go to them as a industrial company trying to build electric vehicles, and we say, look, your idea would be really great in our car. Here's a contract that will pay you money for your idea. And the next thing you know, they disappear. You just never hear from them again. They don't know how to turn their ideas into money. And they just don't cooperate.
Yeah, that's the art of the genius, though, isn't it? They're so genius in everything they do, but the business acumen is not there, Brooks.
True enough. They couldn't run a lemonade stand, let alone a manufacturing plant.
Exactly. They couldn't run a lemonade stand. I think, Tesla didn't care about money either. He just wanted his next invention. He was exploring his brain in a way, I think. He just wanted he just wanted enough money to do his experiments, I think, in one respect.
In those days, the stock market really wasn't what it is today. It wasn't a way that a good idea could raise money. It was a playground for the wealthy. And within 30 years, by 1890, which is, just after the world kind of got its feet after the Civil War, 1890 was a tremendous year for manufacturing. Some of the manufacturing that came along in that area just blows your mind how they just pulled great ideas out of whole cloth. But within 30 years, the great investors, had so wound up the clock spring of the economy of the world that had nowhere to go but to just spring apart like a cheap watch. Fortunately for them, they knew exactly when it was going to spring apart. They pulled their money out of the system. The whole thing came apart, and they walked in, the only ones with money to put it back together again, and we're still dealing with those guys.
Oh, yeah. Without a doubt, we're still dealing with these guys. What do you think of the Wardenclyffe Tower? Do you think we'll ever rediscover what Tesla was doing with the Wardenclyffe Tower?
No, I don't know. I don't think that Tesla understood it himself. It's a little like Einstein's unified field theory. We've been battling with that theory of everything ever since, he left the public eye, probably about 3 years before he died. And I don't think we'll find it with Tesla either. But I think that it isn't important to find it. What's important is the path to finding it. It is sort of like finding the lost texts of various future-looking scriptures. We're not ready for it. If we got our hands on it now, or if the wrong people got their hands on it right now, and I don't know if the wrong people are in the Middle East or in Washington, D.C., but if the wrong people got their hands on it, it would be very bad for the Earth.
Yeah, for sure. Before we get into any really alternative science here books, tell us the listeners about your scientific career, and tell us about the Phoenix Science Foundation and what you do there, and give us a little bit of background about you as the scientist, as the engineer.
Well, I am naturally an Earth explorer, and I of course made a career of it. I've worked for some of the largest corporations in the automotive industry, Toyota and General Motors. I've done lots of work for Ford and Chrysler, and I helped launch some vehicles for Nissan. So I understand that business very well. And I found that what hits the showroom typically is about 5 years old. And sometimes the technology that makes it there wasn't even the best technology that was available. So I formed Phoenix Science Foundation in 2006. I originally formed it as a nonprofit, but even though I prepared the paperwork to file with the IRS, I felt that it just brought too much of a spotlight onto the company. So even though it's filed as a nonprofit, it doesn't have its 501c3. So any money that I put into Phoenix Science Foundation, and I'd say 99% of the money comes from me, I do it just because I want to. And what Phoenix Science Foundation does is it pays for awareness. It publishes books, it publishes videos, it pays for a lot of the travel that I do, go around the world and lecture. It has never made any money. It's never designed to make any money, but it's a good place to just keep the books on what it takes to make people aware. And one of the interesting stories that I came across as I was writing the Arc of Millions of Years series with my co-author, E.J. Clark, we wrote 2,000 pages on the advent of 2012, only we wrote it with archaeological and scientific evidence that a lot of people looked at but didn't put together all in one series. And one of the pieces that we came across was the idea that planets form as hollow spheres. At first, it was probably 2001, I think, when I first came across that myself. I didn't put much stock in it. I just kind of breezed right through it. I said, wow, Hollow Earth. Yeah, boy, that's pretty crazy. And I put it on the shelf and didn't really think about it. And then in 2004, when the first book was published, it took us about 3 years to get the first 1,000 pages together. And then the books flowed pretty well every 2 years after that. But more data started falling into this category of Hollow Earth theory. And by 2005, I was so curious about it that I started to do some research on it to see what evidence had been gathered above the Arctic Circle to see if there, was an opening somewhere. And the evidence went all the way back to 1629 that I could find with Edmund Halley and various, fairly well thought of world authorities who had the idea that planets form as hollow spheres. Newton was one of them. And also a man named Marshall Gardner even patented the idea and died in 1965, I guess, of pneumonia on one of the treks. And then in my own genealogy, I discovered that one of my ancestors was Sir James Ross, who was the discoverer of the North Magnetic Pole. And he almost died the first time that he went out. Wow. His ship got caught in the ice and crushed into splinters. He and his crew, of course, got off the boat, stayed on the ice with their, resources, their food and tents and everything, and they survived, and the ships came and got them, and then he went again, and this time he discovered it. So it's kind of in my blood, you might say. And so I went looking for an expedition to join. I didn't know if we were going to be running behind Huskies or flying on a helicopter. But I found this group out in Utah, who's led by Stephen Curry, that was going to go on a ship on a nuclear-powered icebreaker. So I joined the crew. And I was on the team to build the gyroscope. You have to measure the curvature of the Earth so you know actually when you're sailing into what was theoretically called the oceanic depression. It was a place where sea level isn't sea level, so to speak. It appeared in several maritime records going all the way back to the mid-1600s.
Wow.
And even one retired colonel, a Navy colonel who did several submarine tours under the polar ice caps, and one rear admiral who had retired, who also confirmed that they have areas in the sea that they also call the oceanic depression, a place where sea level is about 1,000 feet lower than it is elsewhere in the sea. And I asked them, what do you think causes that? And the submarine guy, who I'll call Kurt, did not have any idea, but the rear admiral said, well, we believe those are areas on the planet where gravity is just extra high and it pulls the water down deeper, to a lower, closer area to the crust.
That doesn't make sense, though. That doesn't even make sense. That's just like...
Well, I quizzed him out about it. I said, well, do you think it could be an area on the planet where maybe gravity is less than it is elsewhere on the planet? And the surrounding gravity is actually pulling the sea away from that area, leaving that depression. He said, wow, I never thought about it like that, but that's an idea too. Wow. So that would support the idea that at least somewhere on the sea bottom, there's an opening through the crust, someplace where, gravity isn't as intense. We know that gravity is more intense, where mountains are than where there are valleys, because we can measure it. So that's why I was saying it that way, that there might be a great valley in the ocean where gravity is less. So we started out with it, and no sooner did I join the crew, about 7 months later, Stephen Curry, very unfortunately, suddenly passed away. Rapid onset brain cancer. Wow. I spoke to him in November. In May, he was gone. So in September, they elected me to be the new expedition leader, which I held that position until November of last year, when I resigned, because I have to do other things with the company, and I can't give the project the time that I want to, so I gave up the leadership. But I still support it and would still love to participate in that expedition.
So I'm just going to say the website for the expedition is NPIEE. That's the North Pole Inner Earth Expedition. Brooks, where's that state at today? What's the state of play for today for the expedition? Because
we are working with we were working with National Geographic Channel, and the crew, not National Geographic, but the crew that was doing the production moved over to Discovery Channel. So we're now working with Discovery Channel to put together all the evidence that we've collected so far, because we've traveled to Mexico and Tibet and China and Nepal, all over the United States, including Mammoth Cave and we've just kind of followed the legend wherever it led us around the planet. And we've put together a sizable amount of data that leads us to a place where we really don't have an answer. What we have is a giant question that we can't answer. And that's a beautiful setup for science. That's what we like. We don't like to have things so cut and dry that we already know all the answers. What we like is evidence that leads us someplace where we cannot figure it out. Then we start developing experiments, which we invite to come on this ship with us. And when the time is right, we will sail up there, perform the experiments, and tell the world what we find.
Mm-hmm. So let's get into some of the science, leaving NPIEE for a second. Let's get into some of the science, the seismology and the geology and the earth science, Brooks. I mean, there's this depression in the earth that we know. I mean, there was flyovers over the pole. This, like you say, there's some historical reference for this, but scientifically, there's like seismology and geological data as well.
Yeah, we have this theory that is taught to geology students everywhere. I saw it in my geology books. I still have it. I still have the books. And that is that when there's an earthquake on one side of the planet, let's say over on the South Pacific atolls, there's a sharp quake, say a 7.5. It thumps the planet, and those vibrations pass through the globe and are picked up by other listening stations around the planet. And we kind of do an MRI, a CAT scan of the Earth. As we gather those timings of those vibrations, we can look at the inside of the Earth. It is, of course, interesting to oil and gas companies because it saves them the trouble of having to go blast something somewhere to make the same kind of vibration that nature does all by itself. Unfortunately, they have this idea that they force into the data that we live on a molten ball of iron in space, and we exist on the surface of this molten ball on tectonic plates like cornflakes floating around in a bowl of milk. And yeah, it moves very slowly, but nevertheless, we can see the edges of these plates, and we know that they're moving around. And we just make an assumption that the planet's more or less solid all the way through. Liquid in some places, but no real voids inside of it. And then when you look at this thing from a cross-disciplinary point of view, that is to say, you take the seismology that I just mentioned with these vibrations going through the Earth, and then you take the spectroscopy, which is a spectrographic way of looking at the vibrations that come out of the center of the Earth, which the Japanese did a very good job of year before last. And this last year, two female scientists out of Boston, MIT, did a wonderful job at finding the frequency and the temperature of the core of the Earth. And what they came up with is that the Earth is probably pure iron. In fact, it's an iron crystal, and it's not molten at all. It's under high pressure, and it was originally thought that the core was at somewhere around 5,000 degrees C, which is significant. That's hot. It's not as hot as the sun, but it's hot. But these individuals, these two women scientists, resolved that the actual temperature of the crust is more closely to 6,000 degrees C. And the reason that's significant is that's just about the same temperature as the surface of the sun. Wow. And although we don't have a fusion reaction going on inside of our planet because we're not turning hydrogen into helium down there. Mm-hmm. This is the temperature of that iron under that pressure, which means that this core that we have inside the planet is probably part of the original compression of Earth when it formed. Wow. And then when we compare that to the data where we look at the actual continents of the planet, we see the continental shelves of the planet, how they all fit together. Any third grader can see that. We had a primitive idea that all of the continents were together on one side of the planet. We called it Pangea. We called it Gondwana land. But it was very quickly shot down because the outside of these land masses also fit together, not just the inside. So it's sort of like too few puzzle pieces for too large of a puzzle space. And what one scientist did, his name is Neil Adams, he just compressed the puzzle space. He shrunk the planet Earth to about 1/3 its present size, and guess what? All the continental shelves fit together perfectly. Wow. Everything, all sides, which meant that if Earth had as much water as it does now, that the entire planet, except for the very highest mountains, would have been submerged underwater. And of course, somebody said, well, if that was true, then we'd have sedimentary layers from these continents being underwater for millions of years in all the highest mountains. And guess what? We do. And it's not because the mountains pushed up out of the water. It's because the planet expanded as it was going from its, primordial birth to its more cool and stable present state. And the seas simply receded into the lower lying areas, which we know as oceans. But if that was the case, then the geological age of the sea bottom would be radically different than that of dry land. And guess what? It is, by several billion years. Wow. It is really remarkable how all of this cross-disciplinary data fits together to lead us to a question. Is there or is there not a void underneath the crust of our planet?
So if we have this inflatable Earth theory, I mean, it's got to inflate because whatever that reason is, maybe, pressures, that crystal inside the Earth's doing something. You think then there's a hollow where it has inflated for?
Well, obviously, if the crust is moving away from the core, and we have some ideas based on these vibrations that we've been measuring from the seismology, that the crust is somewhere between 800 and 900 miles thick. Then this core, which is somewhere around 12 to 1,500 miles in diameter, this solid iron crystal, when you do the math, you're left with about 1,200 miles of open space unaccounted for.
Wow. This is mind-blowing, Brooks. This is mind-blowing stuff.
Well, there's other data. There's space-based data. We had theories come back to us that there's a point of equilibrium, equidistance, shall I say, between the Earth and the Sun, actually between any two orbiting bodies, one orbiting around the other.
Lagrange points.
And, Lagrange points. Now, this is a point at which you're neither pulled toward either one of the bodies. It's a point of peaceful equilibrium between the two bodies. And that should have a mathematical pinpoint exactly equidistance between the gravitational center of those two bodies. Well, it's 1,200 kilometers off for Earth. It's not in the center of our planet. It's somewhere around 1,200 kilometers toward the surface, which would be a point between the core and the crust.
Wow. This is rock solid math, isn't it? Lagrangian mathematics is rock solid, Brooks. This is like...
well, we've measured it from space. We have geosynchronous satellites 23,500 miles out in space that have been there, since the late 70s. And we know these numbers within a meter.
Wow, this is fascinating, Brooks. The mind is just boggling here. This stuff, like, Okay, so Brooks, if you go to the North Pole, I mean, we know that there's only 2 ships that can make it up there, the Russian icebreakers. What would you go up there to do? You would try and get the circular depression at the poles, or, you know, atmospheric data as well? Will there be many scientists up there doing all sorts?
The best experiments, the very best. You make your plans and you decide what you're going to do. You make your roadmap, as it were.
Very interesting.
And what happens is once you pull away from the dock, everything changes. Every there's no extension cord, there's no resupply line, there's no way to look at it again and say, oops, I think we have another idea now. We need to go back to the dock and get another piece of equipment. So we're making the best guess we can as to what we might see. And we're trying to be prepared for everything. We're trying to build this 110-person team with the right people to be able to look at the right data. So we don't one day, although there's no nighttime in the summer up there, one day you don't look out and say, what's that? And everybody on the team says, I don't know. Mm-hmm. We need somebody on the team to go, I know what that is. So that's hard to put together.
You only get one chance at this as well, Brooks, don't you? You can't turn back. This is an extremely difficult place to get to.
Well, it is not that hard to sail to, I don't think, because this is a 73,000-ton icebreaker. It's used to this kind of stuff, but it is so expensive to put together. It's pretty close to $3 million to put this expedition together. And we've been trying for almost 6 years now to raise the money to do this. It's more than I can afford. And, even if I am successful with what I'm doing with the company, I can't afford it. But, and we have had no benefactors step forward, and we've tried to do several fundraisers, which have been, an exercise in futility, actually. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't happen. So I'm not, a naysayer, and I never give up, but I just didn't have the wherewithal to keep putting that many hours in it week after week and still be able to run a company. So we're hoping that
take a minute to give out your websites there, and give out the radio station that you do as well, Brooks. Give us out your websites there.
Yeah, Sunday evenings, actually tonight at 8 p.m., we're live for 3 hours at X Squared Radio. You can just Google X Squared Radio. We have archives available on the BBS radio network, and we're live on the Truth Frequency network. And we do take calls, and we talk about these subjects as well as, many provocative subjects of the day. We try to take as scientific a look as we can at information. And a lot of that information in the last few months has been to do with this tremendous economic imbalance that we see on our planet. And we try to get to the root of it and where the math leads us, where the numbers lead us. And it's been so remarkable, the response that we're getting from the audience. Like, holy cow, somebody's finally looking at this and really pulling back the curtain and showing who the man behind the curtain is.
Wow. Yeah, I love science radio shows, Brooks. I mean, I try to dabble a bit in it myself, but mostly history, Egyptology, science. I like to keep everybody interested, but it's nice to see another radio show. I can't wait to tune in, Brooks, because I've only just found it, so I'm looking forward to it. You mentioned the iron crystal, Brooks. Just want to go back to that. Do you think then that this iron crystal, this big giant iron crystal inside the Earth, would be, I think people have talked about it being a cosahedron or something like that, and would that be a proponent for this Earth grid theory that, there would be points or nodal points on the Earth crust that would be more energetic, and that's where all these ancient civilizations built their monuments?
We've had a long look at this, and what we have found is that many ancient civilizations, Mayan, certainly Egypt, the alignment of those buildings with Sirius and that star system are within a half arc second. That's no accident. You just don't go out in the desert and align a complex of buildings in a star system shape and align it so well that it stays aligned for 11,000 years. It's just not by accident. Not only that, but we also found the ley lines that go up through the United Kingdom, several places in Europe. There are complexes of buildings and spirit centers built on those. That's no accident either. We found in the oddest places, way up in north of Alberta, Canada, and also in the doggone Indian ancient relics that they assembled, that they appear to have had a knowledge of the arrangement of the planets around our sun. And that's remarkable because we didn't even discover Pluto until, the early 60s. Mm-hmm. We think we're so smart. Mm. The interesting thing about these two complexes is they appear to have a knowledge of our solar system from the outside in, not from the sun out.
Yeah, the other way around.
The observation point was the other way. Wow. If you look at Earth from Mars, it shows up nicely, a nice blue kind of star sitting out there. Mm-hmm. And I would say that if you get within, let's say 65 million miles of our sun, or anywhere of the plane of our solar system, you're going to notice the Earth. It's going to show up as a remarkable planet. In fact, if I was a galactic explorer, mm-hmm. or I was a member of the science crew of that ship, I would be looking for the wavelength of light made by water on the surface of a planet. Yes. And that's why Earth is so remarkable. Like if we ever come to terms with the idea of, subspace travel, not where we jump in an aluminum can and accelerate it to, 500,000 miles an hour and then sit in it for 85 years until we arrive at our destination, which we don't even know is there. If we ever come to terms with the idea that we can actually travel large distances of time across the galaxy in a blink, then I think we'll realize that we're not the only ones here.
Wow. Yeah, I was just thinking about that, we would have this little blue beacon, this little blue twinkle of light, it's like, I'm open to this thought. I do some shows on ufology too, and, I'm open to this. Like, look at the Dogon tribe. They're fascinating in themselves. Like, these guys are writing about star beings and stuff, Who knows if we have our origins, outside the cosmos and, as you say, coming inwards, like, but, just on the Hollow Earth, I just want to tidy up on that. Tell us a little bit about the history of this. I've done a bit of research on it from just previous years, Brooks, but what do you think of Admiral Byrd? Because people, there's for and against for what he, some people say it's fiction, some people say it's history, some people say he was doing military operations somewhere else, he flew over the poles. I'm a little confused on that myself, but what do you think of Admiral Byrd's testimony?
Well, I think where the controversy comes from is what people say was his testimony. Right. He was a Navy admiral. He was a super patriot. And anybody that gives that much of their life, that much of their career to the defense of the Constitution of the United States of America is going to keep his mouth shut if the government tells him to keep his mouth shut. The fact that he flew across the North Pole in 1926 and the South Pole in 1929 and ostensibly participated in a military operation called Operation Paperclip in 1945, where he he led a post-war, highly trained, battle-hardened men expeditionary force to the Antarctica to try to eliminate a latent Nazi threat that might have escaped Germany with some of their higher technology, and came home basically with their tail between their legs licking their wounds. I think all of that can be pretty factually backed up. But there are a couple of what people are calling Admiral Byrd's diaries floating out there, and I've read one of them which was extensive and another one which was fairly short. And my personal opinion is they are not genuine. I followed all the way back as far as I could, and I've talked to people who say that they have seen the originals, but I still do not have enough information to validate those sources. And it's those sources that get so fictional that you really have a hard time putting any credibility in it. You know, the fact that his airplane, or the observation that his airplane was grabbed by some kind of tractor beam, that he was taken inside the planet, that he met all kind of giant beings, highly intelligent, and all of that is nonsense. Mm-hmm. None of that was his original observation. Mm-hmm. All he said was that he flew up there, and he said that he looked down and saw green grass and liquid water where none should have been. And that was his, and from there, it just took off. And if you think there are esoteric communities today, you should see the way they were in the early 1900s.
Yeah, sure. Do we have any satellites that go over the North and South Pole that could photograph? Never mind airplanes.
We do. There are satellites that go high up and can easily see the poles. And when the internet first started really getting out there, I'd say 1996, 1997, some of this data from the early 1968 pictures that came back started to float around on the web. And it started a firestorm because the observations of the North Pole clearly show this nice, neat, blacked out area at the pole.
Wow.
The truth is that the images that are taken by these satellites, especially the one in 1968, doesn't have a big field of view. So it has to be stitched together in film strips. And when they stitch the strips together, they meet somewhere around, the 85th, 87th parallel. Mm-hmm. And that's it. You can't, the strips are so narrow at that point that you just don't get an image. So, that's why that 1968 photograph looks that way. But I went through more than 10,000 of those. Wow. And I never saw the North Pole or the Arctic regions without cloud cover. So they were pretty useless, and they were black and white. Now, today we do have satellites that go over that area, but in 2006, the Data Denial Act was passed, which was a joint act between the European community and the U.S., which we run all of the weather satellites, at least from that time forward. And that Data Denial Act said that they will publish no data above the 60th parallel, because it gives information that can be used for imagery for cruise missiles. So they don't publish that data at all. So there are no publicly available images of the Arctic region. And I have people call me all the time and write me emails and send me YouTubes. Oh my gosh, you need to see this thing on Google Earth. Yeah. Well, I'm here to tell you, Google Earth, everything above the 60th parallel is animated. It is not real.
Wow. Fascinating. Fascinating, Brooks. Yeah, you know, the thing is, there's a military reason, but then there's also feeds the conspiracy theorists. And I mean, I don't mind a little conspiracy theory, Brooks, but I need to see some data in it. I need to be able to follow the data and make a reasonable assumption or a reasonable logistic, logical thought, critical thinking. Like, you know, I have to have something to go on, but.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, on the South Pole down at the Antarctica, I mean, on Google Earth there's a lot of people talking about this big giant cave that goes in. I mean, you can see that on Google Earth. Have you looked at the caves there in Antarctica?
Well, unfortunately, everything on the 60th parallel to the south is also animated. The Antarctic is quite a bit different than the Arctic in that there is a lot of landmass that goes with the Antarctic. And the ice for the Antarctic has been growing steadily for about 50 years. It's larger now than I think, any observation we've ever made. And it's quite thick. Some of it is, several thousand feet thick. So it's obviously a place where you can get some very ancient snapshots of the planet by taking cores of that ice. And in that you can look at microbes and gas content and all kinds of volcanic and snowfall data going back, millions of years if you want to. And that's what mostly goes on down there in the Antarctic. The polar area is not observable. I mean, it's just completely covered with thick ice. But the canyons that exist down there are bigger than anything we have on dry land. It is incredible how deep into the earth those ground formations go. In the Arctic, the sea is about 4,400 meters deep. It is by far the most violent waters on the planet. It's very typical to see 10-story seas up there. Wow. So even in a 450-foot long ship, you're going to be a little bit like a dinghy going up and down, up and down, up and down. And believe me, anybody that has a propensity towards seasickness, they don't want to be any part of this expedition.
I'm not a great seafarer. I'll watch from the armchair any day.
It's not going to be fun.
So, Brooks, I'm sure you've heard about the pyramids down in Antarctica. There's a photograph circling of what people think was an ancient pyramid buried in the ice. Have you looked into that? Do you see any credibility in that?
To be honest, I haven't spent much time looking at the Antarctic at all. It's one of the, I guess, curses of being a PhD is you know a lot about very little. Mm-hmm. And we're just taught to focus in on one thing and try to get as much data, really become an expert on that one thing. And although I venture out more than most, I have to be honest, I just don't have that much information about the Antarctic.
But okay, on the science then of it, I mean, does the Aurora Borealis, the Northern Lights or the Southern Lights for that matter, did they fit into this anyway scientifically? Do we have any, knowledge on that, Brooks? How this fits into? Does that, as they are a polar phenomenon, does that fit into this Hollow Earth theory?
Well, it does, and you ask the question in just about the right way. We, as a scientific community, I won't say myself and my team, really did not know where these auroras come from, either the northern one or the southern one, the Australis or Borealis. The doubt came when we started to do what we call a scatter plot. Scatter plot is where we will plot one piece of data against another piece of data to see if there's a correlation. We're looking for a straight line. We're looking for something, 1 to 1. Every time this happens, that happens. We did a scatter plot between solar wind information and solar flare information and the auroras. And we found that they did not line up very well. They do happen at the same time, but they also happen quite independent of each other. And it was such a question that JPL was contracted to build a set of satellites. Some of the team calls them Themis. I call them Themis. But there are 5 satellites in one nose cone. We launched it in 2009. And the satellites went up there, and it took a while to get into position. They're not particularly powered. You just have to wait mathematically for them to distribute. They're at different altitudes. And so they travel at different speeds around the planet, and it's an algorithm as to when they line up like a ladder going out into space. And then the system turns on, and we hope for an aurora to happen, and then we can take these measurements like in different orbits going out into space. And it was a couple of years, I think it was in 2011, all of a sudden this paper comes out. We finally found the source for the Aurora Borealis. And the article called it Cosmic Bullets. Wow. What happened was the satellites lined up. They all turned on, all 5 satellites. And there was a magnetic explosion between satellites number 3 and number 4. And the explosive force went past 4 and 5 out into space, and then past 3, 2, and 1 toward Earth. And when it was calculated to have reached Earth, the Aurora Borealis happened. The northern lights lit up. And so They published the paper, and really it was the only paper published by the team. And I wrote the team back and I said, this is junk. You can't have one event and then draw conclusions from that. You have to get more data. You've got to understand there needs to be repeatability and reliability. You've got to have, a way to plot this data out so that you can see what the error is in your ideas. Otherwise, anytime there's a coincidence, we could draw cause and effect. And I suppose that's what the, religionists in science have done for a long, long time. And we found out that they're wrong most of the time. So I don't know if that project is still going on. NASA has, I think, 63 active space programs. That was one of them. And I don't know if that one still has funding and if it's still going on or not. I haven't seen anything out of the program since then. What it's an indication of, though, is that NASA wasn't sure. After all this time, millions of orbits around the planet with all kinds of tens of thousands of pieces of equipment, we still don't know what causes those auroras. Now, Hollow Earth theory says that, like any rotating planet, you have an electrojet of ions, magnetic ions, that are forced out of the mass of the planet by the magnetic flux that makes up the north and south poles. It's a flow of energy, an unbroken flow of energy. And that when highly charged particles come out of the inside of the planet, they strike the ionosphere or the magnetosphere around the planet, and they have only one way to release energy, and that's in the form of light. And that's what we see. That's why we see auroras over both poles at the same time, not just the side of the planet that's facing the solar wind.
Yeah, makes sense. Wow. We've had the Northern Lights, the aurora, down as far south as Scotland. Well, you get it in northern Scotland, but we've had it as far south as the top of Ireland. I'm right on the very north of Ireland at the moment, the very top centre of Brooks, and I've just missed it. I know it's my dream to see the aurora without having to go to the North Pole. But, we've had it down this far south. It's what a beautiful sight it is. But like you say, Brooks, we know so little about it. Really, we're grappling with this stuff.
Well, my family, as you know, is from Stranraer.
Yeah.
If you've ever taken the ferry from Belfast to Stranraer, you land in Agnew Bay, right next to Agnew Park, and you'll cross Agnew Crescent. So that's where the ancient Agnews are from, and that's where I'm from.
Wow, beautiful. It's a beautiful part of the world, Brooks. I know it well. I know Stranraer well. I lived in South Scotland for a while, and I actually quite like South Scotland. I miss it every time. I miss it every day I've left. I had to really pull myself away from that place. It's a special place.
Well, the weather's a lot better than where you live.
Yeah,
the north part of Ireland is just unforgiving in the winter.
Yeah, we got a bit of a hammer in there this last day or so, I have to say.
Goodness.
So, tell us a little bit about the mythology of Hollow Earth, because even, like I say, where I'm at now in Donegal, around the top of Ireland, we have our own mythology here about, people going into caves and tunnels into the centre of the earth from County Down up as far as Donegal. There's many, the ancient megalithic builders inherited their monuments from the Tuatha De Danann. And they were known as the people of the earth and like a subterranean inner earth, So even in our part of the world here, we have our own mythology associating this, but it's all around the world, Brooks, isn't it?
It is. The idea of the inner earth or the center of the earth are two different things. At one time, and it was a pretty short period of time, I would say, parenthetically speaking, when it seemed the oceans left their bounds. We call it the ancient flood. It's a common flood motif around the planet. And the way people survived it is, well, of course, we know Noah built an ark. They got a movie come out about it. But most people survived it by going into caves because the weather was just so unforgiving. And so when they talk about the inner earth, this is what they talk about. The Mayans talk about it. I spent 2 weeks on the upper plateau in Tibet, and I spoke to lots and lots of monks through an interpreter. They really didn't have an idea about the inner earth. Of course, they live at 18,000 feet, so maybe they weren't really bothered by it. But other places around the planet. By the way, Tibetan Buddhism has as its symbol a stylized hollow earth.
Wow.
If you order the video that we did, the North Pole Inner Earth Expedition Part 1, you'll see a lot of that original Tibetan footage. And I need to impress upon you how rare this is, because as you know, since 1959, Communist China has controlled Tibet.
That's right.
And they let tourists go into Tibet for about less than a dozen years. They've shut it off again. You can't get in there. So the film that I have from there and pictures that I have from there are behind locked doors in Tibet. You're not going to see it again anywhere, not in this lifetime.
Wow, fascinating. Yeah, I think there's a Russian legend as well about the Samoyeds. They talk about, this in Siberia, that they went underground to a cavern city to live inside the earth. So I'm open to this idea, but I don't know whether they're giant caves or actual hollow earth, or, they would have to go down quite a distance through the crust into hollow earth.
Well, yeah, if you're talking about going into the inner core, you're talking a 900 to 1,000 mile thick crust. Even if you lowered yourself down on an elevator at 10 miles an hour, think about it, how long it would take you to go 900 miles. It's a long, long way. Of course, that's not possible. If you're walking, you need to have probably about 3 months of supplies to reach the inner earth. And that means light, water, and food. I don't know anybody that can carry 3 months of supplies. And that's just to get in. You need another 3 months to get out.
Exactly, yeah. That's only the one-way journey, Brooks. Exactly.
That's why you're not going to hear many stories about people that have walked into the inside of the planet and lived to tell about it.
Yeah. What is our biggest cave anyway? Do you know the biggest cave?
I'm not really sure. I went to the Mammoth Cave system. The deepest known area of that cave system is 366 feet. And I haven't been that deep in it. I've only been about 200 feet, because those are the caves where you don't have to squeeze through too slimy rocks to get that deep. I'm not too fond of really tight places that far under the ground, so I didn't do it. But I did speak to the cavers that work there at the cave. And I stayed there for a better part of a summer. So I spent a lot of time there. And the locals there that know every nook and cranny of that cave say the deepest area is 366 feet. The deepest hole that we've ever drilled is only 8 miles, and that's in Russia. So the deepest mine that we have is about 6,500 feet.
And it gets quite hot as they go down, so, I'm a bit confused about that. So if there was a hollow earth, surely it would be extremely hot in there.
Well, not necessarily. What you're talking about is the mantle of the crust. Yes, the crust is going to be hot because it's undulating all the time. There's a lot of friction in there, a lot of molten material. Mm-hmm. It's not, even to this day, terrifically stable. But the core is going to be quite different. If you have a 6,000 degrees C core, think about the atmosphere out on the outside of our planet. Usably, it's about 6 or 7 miles breathable. Mm-hmm. You could fly in it probably 20 miles, and that's about it. After that, you're in space. Sure. But inside the planet, if we're talking a gap between the core and the crust of something around 1,000 or 1,100 miles, that's all air. There's no vacuum. It's all atmosphere, which means that air blocks all that energy that's beamed off of that or radiates off of that core. It insulates it between that and the crust. So on the inside of the crust, I would say the temperature's maybe slightly higher than it is on the surface of the planet. Maybe 90 or 100 degrees. Certainly, hospitable to human life. Humans can take, for prolonged periods of time, temperatures of, 225 degrees. If it gets much hotter than that, their cooling systems can't keep up, and they'll get weak and pass out. But the human can take 225, even up to 250 for upwards of an hour.
Wow. Fascinating. Brooks, I want to talk to you about some of your books as well. You've wrote quite a few. There's the trilogy, The Arc of Millions of Years, and I think your latest book is the Remembering the Future, The Physics of the Soul. Is that correct?
No, I wrote one after that called Alienated Nation, which is a scientific view of the condition of our government and what can be done to save the Republic. Wow. Remembering the Future was, I think, in 2009, and I wrote Remembering the Future wrote Alienated Nation in 2012.
All right. Tell us a little bit about Remembering the Future, and this is something I do on the show, spirituality and the soul, and I'm deeply interested in. What was the premise for the book?
Well, the premise of the book actually came out of Volume 3 of the Arc of Millions of Years series. I was at the time exposed to the book The Secret, which I read, and it exposed me to this theory of the law of attraction. And I was particularly interested in it because in physics we have, at least on the instrumental side, we have a thing we call the observation effect. This is when we look at something with instruments, we shine light on it, or we beam electrons at it, or we spin the heck out of it, or heat it, or something. Mm-hmm. We observe that sample, but we change it. In our observation of it, we change it. And then I met Dr. Bruce Lipton, and we were talking about the phenomenon that humans have a fairly small set of genes relative to other animals. And yet the genes appear to not equal the number of proteins that make up the human body. And when I was asking him about that, he said, well, it looks like the genes have a choice, a menu of proteins that they can choose from to make. And those choices are influenced by their environment, how much they eat, how much sunlight they're exposed to, whether they work out or not, whether they exercise, or whether they sleep well, and also the consciousness of that being. The energy of the being itself is part of the environment in which those genes, do their protein choices. He said, we know this because we've observed thousands of sets of identical twins. At birth, they're identical. You can scarcely tell them apart. But as they live, and it's theorized in many of these cases, the observations support it, that they do eat the same things, they do live in the same place, they are exposed to the same temperatures in the same household up to probably the middle of their life, sometimes 30, sometimes 40 years old. And yet, their genes, their genetic DNA begins to stratify, goes in two different directions. At 40, they are no longer genetically identical. And the reason that they have assigned to this change is the consciousness of the being itself that is habitating that body. Obviously, twins they are genetically the same, but they're not the same personality. They're different beings inside there. And so their feelings, their dreams, their temperament affects how the genes work. And he backed this up in his book called The Biology of Belief. He talks about several placebo effects, which are not only common in pharmaceuticals, but they're common in surgeries. Unbelievable. Wow. True enough, the belief of the person affects the biology. And so I drove this back at him for 3 hours in this conversation. And I said, look, I'm not a biologist. I have a degree in biology, but my brother's a molecular biologist, very brilliant at it, but I don't spend much time with it. But it leads me to this question. Let's suppose that you have a cell that has reached its point of old age. It's going to die, and it's going to have to divide, or it dies, and the cell next to it has to divide. It needs to make a choice whether to be a tendon, let's say, or a muscle. How does it make that choice? How does it differentiate between which cell to become? He said, well, it takes the information from the cell next to it. I said, well, then let's drive it a little closer to the interface here. Let's say that this cell is right at the interface between the muscle and the bone. It could be one, it could be the other. Or let's say there are only two cells. There's a sperm and there's an egg. How do those cells know? There's no cell next to it. There's no way to know which cell to become as they're dividing and forming this zygote, which will become this fetus, which will become this human. And he said, well, in that case, they fill in the electromagnetic image of the fetus itself. I said, what? He said, there is an electromagnetic image of the fetus in the womb, and the cells fill in that image as they're dividing. That was a real breakthrough. He didn't mention that in his book, but he mentioned it in this conversation with me. And I have it recorded on X Squared Radio if you want to go back and listen to it. But I'm telling you, this was remarkable, because when I put The Secret and I put his testimony together, I realized there was a big missing piece. And so I wrote Remembering the Future, the Physics of the Soul and Time Travel, to help people learn definitively how to master applying energy to the universe themselves, to create the universe the way they want it.
A mix of philosophy and science and biology?
Absolutely. And it is mathematical in its build, but it's quite fascinating to read. It is a spiritual book. There are some pieces in the book that I actually removed because they're too personal. And then as I was deciding to take it to the publisher, I put the pieces back in. I said, heck with it. I'm in my mid-50s. I have nothing to lose. Somebody out there needs to hear my journey. So I put it back in the book, and I will tell you, I have received some amazing mail from readers of this book.
I think a lot about past lives and the soul's journey, and I've developed, I mean, if you had asked me in my early 20s, Brooks, about, you know, spirituality, I'd have laughed in your face. I would have said, talk to me about engineering and atoms or something, like, you know. So it was a very left brain, you know, and I've developed this idea of spirituality. I'm not religious, but I am spiritual, very, very spiritual person. And I really do believe in the soul and reincarnation. But I think there's some evidence for that too, Brooks. I think there is evidence for past life. I mean, I think there was twins born in New York. I had a lady on the show. She was talking about these twins that were speaking a dead language, Aramaic, where the parents weren't Aramaic, like, you know. And then also the Tibetans, aren't they able to, the Dalai Lama, when he reincarnates, there's a philosophy about that as well?
Yeah. In fact, I went to the Dalai Lama's house, and I was speaking to people who live there and take care of his house. He can't go back there, obviously, because he's exiled from the Chinese government. Mm-hmm. But they believe that the next Dalai Lama might be born in the United States, because they feel that the Dalai Lama needs to be born as a free soul this next time. He's very lucky that he escaped Tibet when they had it open. He was able to get out of there. Mm. It was remarkable that we have his intellect and his wisdom. The idea behind that kind of reincarnation is that that person reincarnates as the same soul over and over again, and is able to somehow preserve his memories from lifetime to lifetime and pass them on to the next little boy. Maybe not all of them, but some of them. They have possessions, and that's how they test the Dalai Lama. They don't know who he's going to be or who he's going to be born to. They have a team that goes and tests the Dalai Lama. They give him a series of questions. What was your favorite toy? You know, these kinds of things. Of course, only they know it. And if he's really the Dalai Lama, he's going to know the answer to those questions. And sure enough, he does.
I remember that from the movie Kundun, about Scorsese's film Kundun. It was an awesome film, like, so. Yeah, you know, it's fascinating for me, this whole spiritual thing. I mean, I guess you have developed a spiritual ethic, I suppose, then through your career, then, Brooks.
Well, I would say that I was not raised in a very spiritual environment. Oh, I mean, yeah, we went to church.
Yeah.
But at a very early age, I was able to see the differences between what was written in the scriptures and what they were teaching, and so I really did not digest it. But later on in life, at 19, I began to meditate. I was taught transcendental meditation. And once I could get into that deep state, I started to realize that a lot of the skills that I innately have maybe other people have as well. And I started to see that people come into this planet, come to this world with some propensity of what they like and what they do not like. It's not something they learn in their childhood. Believe me, I've had 4 kids and raised them, and 3 grandkids, and have a 4th on the way. Each being comes in with their own personality, and they have their own innate skills. Yes, some of them are going to be your genetic memory that's handed on to them. But in the book, I discussed 2 other types of memory. There's a star memory, and there's also a light memory. These are ways knowledge comes to us. And what I have seen, similar to the 100th monkey over series of centuries of research, what I have seen is that different peoples at different times, or even at the same times in different places, observe the same thing. And then they use their skill sets or their propensities to express that. For instance, when I was underneath the Patala in Lhasa, Tibet, which is not a place many people get to see. It's behind chains. I asked to go, and they turned me down. And I just sort of walked a few feet away and looked away like I just can't believe I traveled halfway around this world, and they're not going to let me in. And I was just kind of projecting my thoughts about that, and I tap on my shoulder, and the Chinese guard says, "I'll let you in. Just you and a couple of others." And so he unchained the door and let us in. And the 4 of us walked down to the bottom of the Patala, no lights. We moved the curtains back a little bit to get some light. And what we saw down there was just phenomenal. This stupa made of 4,300, 4,400 pounds of gold, 10,000 gems all over it. I photographed it. And as soon as it came up on my digital screen, because I really couldn't see it with my naked eye, but as soon as the flash came back and I could see it on the screen, my guide down there, his name was Punsala. I said, "Punsala, you know what this is?" He said, "Yeah, it's a stupa. It's used to intern the souls of Panchen Lamas so they can return back through the dimensions, to the Creator." And sure enough, on the ceiling is painted a 4-dimensional Stargate right above this thing. I said, No. This is a Tesla coil. This is built just like a Tesla coil. See the lightning coming out of it, stylized here in gold ribbons and red, white, and blue wrapped around it. This is to simulate electricity. They didn't have electricity in the 6th century. They didn't even know what it was, but they created this image of it. And so when I went back to the States, I dug through the pictures and I found a picture of a Tesla coil, and I overlaid the 2, and they matched layer for layer, including the lightning coming out of the side of it. So 2 races, 2 beings, 1,300 years apart, saw the same thing, and they expressed it in different ways. So this light memory comes to us, and we use, the skills and information, education that we have at the time to express those ideas.
Beautiful. You talk about the law of attraction, Brooks. I suppose explain that a little bit in detail, that philosophical concept. That is something very important to me at the moment as I walked into my life, and I'm learning about positive thinking and what that I can achieve from health and happiness. And the author, what was her name? Rhonda
Byrne.
Yeah, she wrote a book about, I can't remember the name, but it was about positive thinking.
Called The Secret.
Secret, yes.
Yeah.
I think, I didn't read the book. It was a movie. I watched a version of it, and
right.
Yeah, but again, I just love this whole. I mean, if there was ever a time the world needed this stuff, Brooks, it's now. But,
well, that's true, and there's no coincidence that there are over 7 billion of us on the planet. We are symbiotes with the planet Earth. There, as far as I know, have never been this many live souls on the planet at one time. In fact, I don't think that there are enough souls to have lived on the planet to make up all the souls that are here. The souls that are here now, many of them came from somewhere else. Oh, they're born here. I mean, they didn't travel here physically, but their souls were born somewhere else and bring other experiences to this planet at this time. I know this for a fact. Mm-hmm. Now, the law of attraction is a philosophical way of saying what we call in science resonance. When two frequencies are resonant to one another, they add energy one to another. We call it constructive interference. Mm-hmm. When the two waves come together, they are either in sync with each other or they are dissident to each other. They're out of phase with one another. In energy, when we throw a bunch of energy together in chaos, we could also call that the universe. Most of the energy is not going to be resonant one with another. It's there, but it's not going to manifest into anything that's usable. About 5% of the energy, 4 to 5% of that energy will resonate one with another, and it will incorporate into other forms. In this universe, and I think in all universes, we see it as protons and electrons. We see these two forms of mass, which are really nothing but resonant energy that have come together to make an electron and to make a proton. I was asked one time at a conference, what are the odds that we would have a carbon-based universe, that we would have a universe made of protons and electrons? And they started calculating the odds, and the zeros started piling up on the chalkboard. And I didn't really contribute at the moment, but after about 20 minutes, I said, you know what? I think it's 100%. And they said, what do you mean 100%? Look at all the other elements. I said, no. It's resonance. The only way that energy could resonate to become physical is the way this universe has formed. There is no other way. And so once we realized that, it was really a turning point for the conference. We realized that dark matter, dark energy is really we call it dark matter, could be very bright for all we know. Mm-hmm. It is unresonant energy. And that energy has to resonate at exactly the right ratio. And that ratio is 1.618 to 1. That's the ratio that they talk about in The Secret. They don't understand it. Mm-hmm. They don't understand this slope of increase is the divine pattern. Yeah. It is the way that energy comes together and makes matter. It can't do it any other way. Any other way, and it will fall apart. That 1.618 to 1 ratio is critical. And that is the key to the Fibonacci sequence. And what I learned as I was teaching college algebra to adults at a university for a couple of years, and the second year I had some adults in my classes that really didn't have a lot of experience with this kind of mathematics. And I felt if I teach this section on Fibonacci math, it's going to go in one ear, out the other. They might pass the test, but they're never going to use it again. So I started to say, we've got to learn to apply this somehow in real life to these people. So I started playing with the calculator. We all know you start with 0 and add 1 to it and you get 1, right? And then 1 to 1 you get 2, and 2 to 1 you get 3, and you could follow it just like the alphabet. A, B, C, 1, 3, 5, and 8, so forth on that way of increase. But what happens if you start in the middle somewhere? So I just took two random numbers that had no association with each other. I took 75 and I took 216. Far enough apart, one's odd, one's even, they're not divisible into each other. They don't know each other from Adam. But you add them together and you get 291. And so I just followed the Fibonacci process. Add those two to get a third. Take the second and third and add them together to get a fourth, and so forth. Mm-hmm. By the time I got to the 8th number, you could divide the 7th into the 8th, and you got 1.618 to 1.
It's fascinating.
So I said, oh, wow. So I said, well, maybe it only works with integers. So I took decimals. I took fractions. I took rational numbers, irrational numbers, imaginary numbers. It worked every single time. And so I said, if it works with numbers, it'll work with energy. And that is the basis of remembering the future.
Sounds awesome, Brooks. That sounds awesome. I did a philosophy show on the Fibonacci ratio. It's totally mind-blowing because the ancient Egyptians had this off to a fine art. They were in harmony with nature. They have the golden ratio, the Fibonacci ratio, as I say, incorporated into the Great Pyramid and all sorts of other stuff as well. And I think sometimes I look back at ancient civilizations and I wonder what was lost. Especially ancient Egypt, Brooks. These guys had something very, very special. I think we've descended into chaos, and hopefully we can come back out of that chaos and back to some sort of natural harmony, Brooks. But like you say, in this law of attraction is, just, I think we've got to philosophically change ourselves, Brooks. And that's important. I want to, Brooks, I want to do some justice here and get into some of your political stuff, because you've been talking about Agenda 21, and tell us about your politics book, the most recent one then, Brooks.
Well, to be accurate, it's not a book on politics. It's a book on government. Okay. What it does is it talks about the American government as it was originally formed, and then a strange thing happened in 1933. In 1933, we elected a man came to office named Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was the famous governor of New York. He was really larger than life at a time when the nation really needed somebody larger than life. The crash had happened. We'd been through 2 wars. It was one war, and it was just, terrible. 3 recessions, and then a depression, and the whole world, the whole planet was in a rough spot. But strangely enough, he comes to office, and out of the blue, literally within months, this new government, which I call the agency government in the book, is passed. It is a set of agencies which later become, the EPA and the FDA and the FBI and all these bureaus, departments, administrations, and departments were just out of a box, ready to go. And they were assigned budgets, and off they went. Well, 80 years later, in 2013, the agency government is so powerful, they command so much money that they are no longer governing the country. They're ruling the country. And the nation has finally come to the realization that it really doesn't matter who we elect. The elected government doesn't control the government anymore. It's this agency government that controls the government. They outlast and laugh at the congressmen and senators. Mm-hmm. They could care less who's president, and they could care less about us. Yeah. And what has happened is a very, very vague part of the Constitution allowed the agency government to be formed. They allowed it to develop by court precedent into a body that can tax us and fine us and confiscate our property and restrict our commerce. And we have no representation in that government at all. And that is tyranny. And it must go. Mm-hmm. So the book is about a cry for a constitutional convention run by the 50 states, by the governors, not Congress, not the Senate, not on a federal level at all. It's called an Article 5 convention. There's a provision for it in the Constitution, although it's never been done, because it's been feared to open Pandora's box. Really, this would be the Civil War, but it would be a legal one, and it would be conducted according to constitutional guidelines. And I guess they're working on it right now, to set up an agenda, to set up a structure so that this kind of convention can take place without tearing the whole republic apart. One thing's for sure, they're fighting a $200 trillion body, so it's not going to be easy.
Wow, that book must have set a cat among the pigeons, Brooks.
Well, when I wrote it, I actually wrote it about 4 years ago, and then I tweaked it when I was put in the chair after a motorcycle wreck. I said, okay, I'm going to go through this book and finish it. And I published it in July of 2012. Within a week, it went to #1 on Amazon. And then within 2 weeks, almost every single headline that you read in the paper was a chapter in this book.
Wow.
And then a year later, Mark Levin came out with his book called The Liberty Amendments, which did a much better job than mine at outlining the actual amendments that needed to be done. But that book took off like wildfire, and it went to governors, and I got a lot of comments back on the book. It started something that I don't think is going to be stopped.
Sounds like an important body of work, Brooks. Perhaps for awareness or people, because I think a lot of people, they're disengaged with politics at the moment, especially in America. I mean, they're so patriotic, but I mean, they're feeling really, really let down, Brooks. I mean, they know something's been derailed.
You realize that politics has nothing to do with it. It doesn't matter who is elected.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter which, lever you pull or which box you check. It's all the same. They all work for the same corporations. They're all funded the same way. When they get to Washington, it just all blends in. You look at the trials, the hearings that are occurring in Congress when they pull these various agencies in. If it's alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, if it's the FBI, if it's the IRS, if it's the GSA, they sit in those chairs and they laugh at those congressmen. They tell them, I don't recall, or I take the fifth, or I'm going to give you a blank piece of paper, or better yet, one that's all black, and that's going to be my evidence to you. And then I'm going to go back to my job, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's why America is frustrated.
Explain Agenda 21 to me, Brooks, because I haven't really got into this. I just know the name gets thrown about a lot. It's not something I researched heavily, but...
Agenda 21 is an agenda that was put forth by a group of esoterics that many of them are jewelers. And if you know anything about the jewelry industry, these are people that run diamond and gold cartels. Mm-hmm. This group put together an agenda which is called the Rewilding Program. It basically removes humans from large swaths of the ocean and land, forces people to live in mega cities, leaving the rest of the world as a wilderness, which of course they will enjoy. It basically gets the rest of the world out of their way so they can enjoy the world unfettered without you there. And they actually have in their charter the idea that the optimum population for Earth is somewhere around 500 million people. We're obviously well over that number now at 7 billion. So their plan is to seize real estate in large amounts, like millions of acres at a time. And they're already doing it. They've already done several portions of the ocean, claiming that fish need those areas, to grow unfettered, and there can't be any fishing in these areas. And they're using courts, legislation, and they're also using, money, of course, to force their way into various jurisdictions. And it's not a laughing matter. It is taking place at very, very high levels.
Wow, fascinating. Is this a conspiratorial element, do you think? Is this like a known agenda? Is it like a conspiratorial agenda, or? It's
not too unknown because it doesn't take long. If you want to look up Agenda 21, you want to look who the board is. I've got the list of their names. Mm-hmm. I have their individual websites, their individual holdings and resumes, and these are the most radical environmentalists that you can imagine. The whole group is put together of, like I said, mostly jewelry and gold cartels.
Yeah. I know the Georgia Guidestones that talk about getting this number down, that they don't want there's a banking elite, definitely, I'm convinced that, those want this population reduced, at any cost, Brooks, at any cost, and I think that's a scary perspective. I look into this and it's frightening and it's scary, it's like, we're in one way, I look at this earth, Brooks, and, we're in dark times, and then, I look at it and I go, okay, we are, but let's be positive about it. You don't fall by the wayside, don't give up, if you give up, it's over.
Well, there's a couple ways of looking at it. The real value at existing here on this planet is that you can take your sweat and your know-how and your strength and you can plant a seed in the ground. And by your skill, you can grow food, you can harvest it, package it, and ship it to someone who will then take that value and put it into their lives as food or cattle feed or whatever. In between, there's this system of exchange so that I can go to my job and do what I do for $1, which is just a promise to pay. And then I can ship that dollar electronically to Ireland, and I can buy a piece of art or a piece of wool, and you'll take that value, that system of exchange, and you'll send me my wool. What the bankers have done is they have, I think, improperly figured out, or at least devised for themselves, that the value of Earth is actually the system of exchange and not the work that's done on either end of that process. And that's false. It's a false doctrine. And once people realize that the real value is the work that I can do and that you can do, and that we can figure out a way to exchange that work with or without a dollar or any kind of element, any kind of pebble or clam or chunk of gold, it doesn't matter. Once we realize that we don't have to accumulate hundreds of billions of dollars of wealth to be successful on this planet, then the whole thing will change. The whole banking thing will become irrelevant. How much money you have in the bank, how many toys you have in your garage, what your retirement structure looks like will become completely irrelevant.
Sure. You know, what's new for you now, Brooks? What are you working on at the moment? Are you doing any more books? Are you just concentrating on radio, or?
No, I'm always writing. I write every day. So, I've got something else, 2 projects that I'm working on. One is a screenplay, which is called Birth. It's a little odd spelling, but it is designed to teach people about the union of the polarity, open their eyes to the fact that we're not alone on this planet, nor are our designs our own. And it's a science fiction movie, but it's more truth. In the screenplay, none of the names have been changed. They're all exactly who they really are. And that's one of the things the producer likes about it. It's a trilogy, and the movie's coming out as the second movie first, and then the first, and then the third. So it'll be an eye-opener. That's one project I'm working on. And then we're working on a 13-piece series with the Discovery Channel on Hollow Earth theory. And then, of course, in my private life, I have the company and trying to get electric cars out on the road.
There mustn't be enough hours in the day for you, Brooks, would there?
We don't work days; we work calendars.
For sure. Yeah, what was I going to say? Yeah, FDR, was he not a Freemason? Or suspected as a Freemason?
He was, but more importantly, the discovery, and it unfortunately didn't happen. It was suspected, and you could tell by what we did after the war. But it's now known that the Soviets had, in fact, invaded Washington, D.C. with a number of very powerful agents that had infiltrated, in fact, probably were the early leaders of those agencies, may still be. But the most important one was a man named Harry Hopkins, who was a very powerful Soviet agent that had befriended President Roosevelt and actually ran the entire war with one goal in mind, and that was to make sure that the Soviets ended up with half of Europe, which they did. We have exactly the same thing happening today. We have an agent in Washington who's very close to the president, who has very high protection, and she is running everything.
Fascinating, Brooks, fascinating. Brooks, where can we get a copy of your book? I presume all usual outlets, Amazon and...
Yep, all the usual places. Now, if you buy it from the website, if you go to the book's websites, Remembering the Future or Alienated Nation, you get the book, of course, autographed, but you'll also get the book in audio. I will send it to you as a link, so you'll have the audio version and the written version. So if you're not a great reader, don't worry about it. I read it for you.
Wow, nice. Wow, yeah, there's not enough audiobooks out there, Brooks. I think it's great, and I know somebody that can't physically read, and they use audiobooks all the time, and it's a great thing. I mean, he has a disability, so I did an audiobook for him for my own book, and that was great because I did especially for him, but there is a lot of people out there that just like to drive as well and just, put the CD in or whatever.
Sure. Well, I notice a lot of Americans have the same disability, and that's the American school system. So that's why I put the audiobooks out.
Wow, fascinating. Brooks, I thank you for your time today. I really do. What a fascinating guy. You're such a prolific researcher, and, I commend you in what you do, and I can't wait to tune into X Squared Radio now. That's x2-radio.com, is that correct?
Yeah, or you can go to xsquaredradio.com. Either way, you can put it into Google. It'll take you right there. And the player opens up right on the screen, so you can just listen to what's going on the network at any time. If you do that at 8 p.m. on Sunday nights, you'll be listening to me.
Wow.
There's a call-in number right there, so if you feel compelled to call, please do, by the way. Call and ask questions. We'll answer them live on the air for 3 hours tonight.
Wow. And it's mostly science you do, a science webcast?
Yeah, it's, of course, we tackle all kinds of subjects. It's not just space stuff and biology stuff. We also tackle the news of the day and what's going on. And, it can get quite impassioned sometimes.
Do you ever look into chemtrails, Brooks?
I have.
What do you think of it?
Jury's still out for me.
Me too.
I know the aviation industry very well, and I just cannot get past the idea that commercial airliners are dumping chemicals into the air. I know everything that goes on those planes, and I'm just not convinced that's happening. Now, if there are military planes out there doing it, I don't doubt it, but not commercial passenger planes. Contrails can look just like chemtrails.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, Brooks, I thank you for your time today. We're just going up to top of the second hour. What a fascinating chat, Brooks. You come back anytime. You've an open invitation to come back anytime, Brooks. And I thank you for your work, and I thank you for your time today.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been great.
Thank you for your time, Brooks. Take care. Speak.
All right. Bye-bye.
Just on the military then, and I want to talk about HARP, Holes in Heaven documentary. HARP is this facility in Alaska. Most people would probably be aware of this nowadays. I think it's now fashionable to talk about Tesla. I mean, I remember growing up and doing my electrical engineering exams and electronics as well, and it was obviously you would learn about Tesla doing that. The unit of magnetism is Tesla, but back then nobody ever knew of Tesla. Now it's fashionable to talk about Tesla. But there's been a lot of documentaries, and I think he knew himself that he wouldn't be remembered for his accomplishments until many years had passed. He even said on his deathbed. It's strange he even envisaged that as well. But for those not familiar with HARP technology, can you tell us a little bit about HARP, and then tell us about your contribution to the Holes in Heaven documentary?
It's an interesting story. I started in 1983. I was hired by an oil company to take a technology that they had been exposed to but wasn't perfected, called ground probing radar, and to develop it as a field suitable instrument for exploring for oil in some of the world's most inhospitable areas. It had some promise. There was some Tesla technology where radio waves, clean radio waves, long wave, could be beamed into the ground. They would, of course, reflect off of all of the substrata in the ground, bouncing all over the place, and they could be picked up, those reflections, a ways off, and then they could be spectrographically analyzed because they had now been twisted all up by reflecting off various strata in the ground, and those wave patterns seemed to, at least the original inventor of it, Nikola Tesla, seemed to think that there was some indication of what the structure of the substrata might be based on those wave shapes. Well, of course, it takes a painstaking data collection. And one of the things that I had access to that Tesla did not have access to is all of the geological data from the drilling. I had the geological records from all of the wells that were drilled within, 100 miles of me as I was doing this research. So as I would go out and I would take the readings, and I developed the antenna system and the way of controlling the antennas remotely so that I could get literally quarter-degree increments, and I could get the readings and collect the wave shapes and start to do the statistics. And what I determined from that is that there were characteristic wave shapes for oil and gas and water and coal and shale and water, fresh and salt. And it became very useful information to the oil and gas industry. There were some shortcomings to it, which I overcame with other methods, collecting precision gas samples, headspace samples, and also reading and spectrifying the radiation species that were coming up through the ground. I was able to, give good analysis of what was under the ground. So I did that for 3 years, every single day, 8 hours a day, and I was about bored out of my mind, but I was making really good progress with it. And when we finished with it in the 4th year, we drilled 55 oil wells in 9 states, and we never missed. And we examined about 350 wells in that 1.5 year period. So a lot of those sites were dry, which we correctly predicted that they were dry, and the ones that ended up having oil, we were 100% correct. So the system did work. It was very repeatable. I published a paper on it, and the writers or the developers of the HARP video read that paper, and they contacted me in 1997, some years later, and said, we would like you to contribute. So I said, sure. I looked at their data, their information, and I met Dr. Bernard Eastland, who was the one that originally penned the 7 patents that became the basis for HARP. And to tell you the truth, it scared the hell out of me. The power I was working with was up to about 50 watts. That's about all the power you can handle remotely with batteries out in the wilderness. And we were successful with it. We could take readings with it. We had some strange events happen. One time we were up in Oregon, and we turned the unit on, and 5 seconds after we turned it on, there was what felt like about a 4.5 quake occurred underneath us. And although, it could have been marked out as a coincidence, we really didn't think that we had caused that quake. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, when you're taking records, as I said, you don't throw out any data. Oh, by the way, when we turned it on, we had an earthquake. You put that in your lab notebook, and you never think anything is going to come of it. And then I see this 1 billion watt system in the same frequency range that I was working with ground probing radar with the original Tesla technology. Only they're putting so much power behind it, and they're focusing it and reflecting it off the ionosphere. I said to myself, this thing could really trigger a quake. If there's a quake ready to happen, this thing could make it happen on command, and it could steer weather around. So those were the 2 areas that I could offer some expertise in. Dr. Nick Begich offered the expertise on the mind control aspects of the weapon system.
Yeah, Tesla was a little bit worried about his own inventions too, wasn't he? He was very protective of, his knowledge, because he knew that it was powerful. The stuff that he was inventing or philosophizing and built this stuff in his head. I mean, he was worried what use it was going to be used for.
Well, at first he wasn't. And I would say for half of his scientific career, he was not worried at all. He was prolific. And I would say that there were several people who wore out good sets of shoes running his ideas to the patent office so they could claim credit for it. I would say Tesla did not do a good job of protecting his ideas in the beginning, but later in life, after he saw what the capitalists were doing, or I should say major corporations now, what they were doing with his technologies, then he became much more protective, and he went to his grave with many of his ideas so buried in code that no one was able to.
Greetings, everybody around the world, wherever you may be. You're very welcome to another edition of Capricorn Radio. This is your host, James Swagger, and for the next couple of hours, we're going to be talking to Brooks Agnew. Before we do, just don't forget you can check out the archives on the new YouTube channel, Capricorn Radio. You'll find that at capricornradio.com. You'll find the links there. And don't forget we're doing 2 live shows a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. And I also do the other Saturday show for Philosophy Think Tank, and it's getting quite a few hits. So don't forget to subscribe, folks, and check it all out. So let me tell you a little bit about today's guest. I'm not going to go too mad on his bio, because the guy's going to tell him himself. He's Brooks Agnew, who's been raised in Pasadena, California. Dr. Brooks Agnew spent most of his youth hanging around Caltech and the folks who co-opted at Jet Propulsion Labs. He entered the Air Force in 1973, where he became electronics engineer. After earning an honorable discharge, he attended Brigham Young, Western Kentucky, and Tennessee Technological Universities. He has a bachelor's degree in chemistry, a master's degree in statistics, and a PhD in physics. He's featured scientist in the 1997 Wendy Robbins documentary on HARP, Holes in Heaven. He is currently the president and CEO of Vision Motor Cars Incorporated, designing and manufacturing affordable electric vehicles for highway use. What a bio that is. So without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Hi, Brooks. Welcome to Capricorn Radio.
Oh, thank you very much. Good to be here.
Wow, what a bio you have. What a super interesting guest I have today, Brooke. I feel privileged.
Necessity is the mother of strange bedfellows. What can you say?
For sure. You've had quite a strange career, Brooks. I mean, I know you're an author as well. We're going to get into some of your books later, but you're not afraid to put yourself on the line and have a look at some things, Brooks. And that's unusual as a physicist. I mean, I know because I have a degree in physics, and it's mostly academic. I mean, I'm an engineer by trade, to be honest with you, but I find physics is a bit, it's a bit watertight. You're not allowed to think outside the box. Only so much, but you strike me as a guy that wants to be outside the box. You want to be on the cutting edge of things, Brooks. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, well, that's the fun part. In physics, you have to kind of draw an ideological line in the sand. It's either you're going to only collect data that agrees with your hypothesis, or you're going to collect it all, even if it takes you in another direction. And I just resolved to do the latter. I just said I'm not going to throw out data, no matter how weird it is. And, you have to classify it correctly. Sometimes it's just personal observation or opinion, but sometimes it's very, powerful information that leads you in another direction with another conclusion beside the one that you, wanted to find with your original hypothesis.
I remember that Harp documentary, Holes in Heaven. That was awesome. I remember seeing that when it came out, Brooks. And, I guess you go into Tesla technology quite a lot. I mean, that's quite cutting edge stuff too, like.
Well, it's hard not to. There's another soul that,
Wow.
Just kind of went where the evidence led him, and he wasn't afraid to plug into energies that, people had, not used before. We still, to this day, really don't understand what electricity is. I mean, we know how to use it. We know how to predict it and calculate it and measure it and quantify it and pay for it, of course. But we don't really know what it is. And I think that when Tesla began coaxing electricity from whatever dimension it comes from into ours and using it to really do great things, big things, it scared people.
Yeah.
One or two great inventions, and he was a genius. After one or two, he became a crackpot, and they really had to get him out of their society because he was going somewhere where the capitalists didn't want to go.
Yeah. What a pioneer he was, Brooks. What a pioneer this man was. And like you say, genius. I think, I put him on a par with Einstein. Einstein was a genius of the physics, and he was a genius of the experimental end of things, Well,
Einstein had his limitations, and he admits them himself. He was not a great mathematician. He needed a lot of help learning mathematics after he became a physicist to explain the things that his genius mind was leading him to. For instance, he was a great theoretical physicist. He could put himself in an elevator or on a spaceship or riding on a photon somewhere. And with that perspective, really taught us how to understand and how to explore the universe. But the math to get from, to quantify time and force and mass, that he had to practice with, that he had to build on. And one of Einstein's greatest features, one of his greatest personality traits, was that he was very good in the public eye. He was kind of physics frontman for a lot of great minds, Fermi and other physicists that were more brilliant in some respects than Einstein, Max Planck and Niels Bohr. They were all great minds, but they didn't like the public eye. And so they let Einstein sort of be that public eye, and he became a very good interface for the general public with the complex ideas behind physics.
What strikes me too, Brooks, is that Tesla and Einstein were of the same era, and there wasn't much interaction. If anything, they were aware of each other, I think. But
yeah, not at all. In fact, they were in different fields completely. Einstein was really a contemporary with Mark Twain. Mark Twain was one of his very close friends. As you know, Samuel Clemens was a great, satirist and a writer. And Nikola loved to show his newest inventions and ideas to Sam Clemens, to Mark Twain, and often used him as a kind of, human prop in some of his World's Fair demonstrations, much to Mark Twain's consternation. One time he demonstrated a subsonic beam on him at a World's Fair, and it caused Mark Twain to lose control of his bowels.
Wow.
So it was just one of those weird relationships. They were both creative souls, and they really enjoyed each other's presence.
I find it quite sad sometimes. I'm quite a humanitarian too, Brooks, and I look back in history, and I like to research the scientists, I like to know the minds behind the science and the personal life story that they had. And I feel so sad about Tesla, who he died alone in a hotel room, knowing that he, gave the world its modern perspective, all the electricity, all the lights, all the inventions. He knew he wouldn't be remembered.
It's absolutely true. Absolutely true. It is sad, and it is, he was an outcast. He was, banned. He was sent to Colorado Springs, with the express understanding that we'll continue to feed you a little bit of money so that you can play out there, but you stay out of our playground, out of our sandbox. And so Westinghouse and, Edison and JP Morgan made, unbelievable amounts of money off of connecting humanity to the grid that Tesla had created.
He was up against it with these titans, wasn't he, Brooks?
We all are. And it's a sad thing to see. And that's one of the things I do with my radio program is I go into some of the programs that are leading edge, either in genetics or in energy or in, so we call it instrumentation. And if you trace back through the grants from the universities that develop some of these ideas, it all leads to one place. It leads to a military complex. Even the movies that we see coming out of Hollywood that have to do with science fiction, the funding for those movies is so critical for these films to be able to make it to the screen, for people to be able to see them and enjoy them in a theater, and depending on what kind of special effects they have or what kind of theme they have, it takes a lot of money to make some of these movies, hundreds of millions of dollars sometimes. A lot of that money comes from the same sources. So you have to wonder, what kind of, propaganda are we being fed? If you are a creative scientist, or you have a incubator shop, or you're, bringing some great inventor, whether he's a teenager or a seasoned engineer, under your wing in your factory, and you need grant money to be able to experiment on things that probably won't return on an investment unless you make a really great breakthrough. Mm-hmm. That has to usually come from risk funds that are typically come from grant funds. And unfortunately, 90 to maybe close to 100% of those grants come from military sources. Yeah,
the military is 20, 30 years ahead of the actual, public domain, and I think it will always be like that, Brooks. I can't see it changing anytime soon.
People I know in that genre, what motivates them, what drives them to do this is they tell me, we have to do this. And I say, why do you have to do this? Why do you have to keep inventing something to put under that red button on your desk? And they say, because if we don't do it, our enemies will, and we'll be caught off guard. And I said, that's all well and good. I understand the philosophy behind that. But then why, when you hook it up to the red button on your desk, are you compelled to push it?